Welcome to Vintage SVTs, the Deep Magic. So on this one, it was time to recap it. And it had been partially recapped poorly. I've got those kind of cheap glued in caps out of the way. They were using the old clamps from Ampeg, and I have drilled out those rivets to get those out of the way. And I've removed all the connections in this area. I'm leaving the old filter can caps in place for cosmetics on the outside. You'll still see the nice cardboard tubes and all. I've bent the positives down so I don't have to have as much space above them. I'm not going to worry about the negatives. They're not connected to anything at this point. And I've got a really good plan for what's going to go here. But I wanted to talk about something else. The ground scheme in these Ampegs, like many Ampegs, is kind of crazy. So you've got a ground over here which connects to the center tap, the secondary common on the output side of the output transformer. And that ground wire goes all the way across here to this filter cap negative, which also has a wire going to the quick connect kind of thing, the multi-pin connection that goes to the preamp. And then this negative is also soldered to this negative. And then you've got the heater balance pot ground going to there. You've got a ground from this board here. You've got a ground from this board to here. You've got some negatives with some caps attached here as well, the externally mounted ones. But none of that is tied to chassis. The wire that goes from this negative on this cap to this board right here actually, goes through all this stuff and comes out here. And then using just a tiny little wire as part of a shielded connection goes to the input jack here for the external amplifier. This is basically an effects loop. So you got the output of the preamp and the input of the power amp. And it goes to here. Let me get that a close-up shot for you. So you see this tiny little wire here, which is part of the shielding of this cable. That is the entire chassis reference for all the grounds in this amp. And a similar tiny little wire goes through a same kind of shielded cable from that multi-connector to the preamp. And on this amp it had broken and I had a bad hum. So I'm going to augment that with a sturdy wire going from the main amp to the preamp. And on this one, I don't like this. Now, it's not a matter of current because the chassis reference does not have much current to chassis. There's the current that flows in the DC negative, but that only matters from section to section to section to section throughout the actual audio circuit where the DC is concerned. This reference to ground is just for shielding, but if this goes away, the entire amp gets very loud and hummy, and it's just kind of crappy. So in my new rebuild, I'm going to make a new chassis ground connection, which will not be relying on the toothed washers kind of sort of making its way through the black paint on the chassis. It's powder coated, so it's a really tough finish, and you're just not getting a very good chassis connection there. So I'm going to make a new chassis connection in this area right here, which will have some of the powder coating removed. So I have really good metal-to-metal contact, at which point I'm going to disconnect this. It'll still be tied. I don't know whether I'm going to disconnect it at the jack end or the board end, probably the jack end, just for best practice telescope shield. So it'll still be shielding, but it won't be making a ground connection. If I make a real good connection, say from right here to the chassis, and I leave this here, then we'll introduce a ground loop, and that's bad too. But some Ampegs do have that. They'll have a connection over here from the filter caps to chassis, and they'll have this. Now the schematic for these old ones shows a 10 ohm resistor between the DC negative part of the circuit and ground. It's not actually in this amp. I don't think I've ever seen it in one, but it's on the schematic. But a 10 ohm resistor is not that great. So we're going to have a very nice solid chassis connection for grounds here, and this will just be used for shielding, and I will make sure that similar things are happening for the ground connection to the preamp. Let me show you what's going to go in this space over here, though. Over here, I've measured this distance that I have, and how long this is, and where these things are, and how deep the entire chassis is. And I know that I can put in a little circuit board right here with 4 standoffs. And if I get the standoff lengths correct, then I don't have to remove these caps. It'll be a nice gap between these unused negative connections and the bottom of the board. And that PCB will go right here and let me use modern capacitors. Much easier to change everything out, and much more solid connections. And I've planned it all out so these existing wires will connect to the board. It'll be a very easy thing to retrofit one of these, and goodness will follow. Now, some of you are already furiously typing, "Don't put no PCBs in a vintage amp." Do I have to say it? Don't make me say it. Same thing goes for 70s Marshalls. All right, here I have recreated the actual schematic of what happens in the Ampeg SVT with 6550s from this era. The previous version with the other tubes, whose name escapes me at the moment, are pretty much the same, except that this node does not exist. I've even kept the same component names as on the existing app. So instead of going R1, R2, I've got R47, R48, C10, C12A, C12B, C11, C1. That's an added cap because I'm doing a series thing, because 600 volt caps are hen's teeth. R1, R2, these are added for the new series connection. C9A, C9B, C8. C25 is in the preamp. This is actually not going to be part of this, but I was just for completion's sake. And this is going to be the existing 15 watt resistor in the app. R50, R52, all the existing dropping resistors, which are currently on the PCB in the SVT. They can be kept on the PCB, or they can mount it on what I'm creating, which is right here, very nice and neat. And this probably doesn't show you everything that you want to see. So let me switch over to this mode. And this will be very nice. Easy drop-in, 4 standoffs. I use steel standoffs. Everything labeled to connect to the existing nodes in the SVT. So C, E, H, D, the ground for that end of the board, the output transformer ground, the preamp ground, the orange wire from the primary, from the power transformer, A node, another ground that goes to the board right there, and then 2 for B, so you can run the connection going to the multi-connector from this board or from the old board. Just a little bit of flexibility. And this thing should look pretty nice. The wrong button. Wow. Oops. Sorry. I meant to do this, and I forgot that it wasn't a touch screen. So, cool. Anyway, so I'm going to use some very modern techniques to make this vintage SVT sound like it's 1970 whatever all over again.